Hi class, this is Sir Alex again. Welcome to our lesson in General Biology 1. We are continuing on with our discussion with biological macromolecules, focusing today with lipids. So we've discussed a little bit about lipids, especially when we have discussed phospholipids, which is part or major component of the cell plasma membrane. But today we're going to expound more our knowledge regarding lipids, which are basically fats. Now um, we commonly know them, a lot of them basically as fats, but also lipids are used with a lot of functioning in our body and a lot of, for example, hormones, a lot of particles and molecules that are useful in our body. So let's begin our discussion by discussing what are lipids. So lipids are basically a diverse group of compounds that are generally hydrophobic. No? And this includes a lot of different compounds that we are going to discuss some of them today. And they have different functions in our body. One is for energy storage, which we commonly known as the fats that are stored in our body. No? The second is for insulation from environments. Some mammals, has oil coating or lipid coatings in their body, such as aquatic animals and aquatic birds, to prevent them from getting wet, to keep them dry. So if you've noticed, if you've played with ducks before, especially baby ducks, and watched them play in water, you can see that the water just roll off their backs. That is because their feathers are coated with lipids, preventing their feathers from getting wet, so that they can still fly even though they are in the water, especially when they are older. Another way that you can actually see this is on some hydrophobic plants. So some of the outer coating of plants can contain water. That is because there is a lipid covering the stem or the leaves of a plant. Another component of lipids or another function of lipids is it is used in making hormones. So our hormones in our body, the estrogen, estradiol, the testosterone that we're commonly known, actually came from lipids. No? And they're more specifically a type of lipid, a type of fat content is cholesterol. So the precursor for our hormones is actually cholesterol. And we're going to discuss that later and how they are created. And lastly, we are very familiar, they are a major component of the cell membrane. So we've discussed about cell membrane and how phospholipid, which are types of lipids, creates this phospholipid bilayer, which creates the cell membrane in order to separate the ECF and the ICF, or the extracellular fluid, from the intracellular fluid of the cell. So let's begin by discussing what are lipids. Lipids are basically fat molecules. Now, fat molecules has two components. One is what we call a glycerol, and glycerol are molecules with three carbons, five hydrogens, and three hydroxyl group. Our OH group is also what we call an alcohol group, or in their term, we call them also hydroxyl group. And fat molecules also contains what we call fatty acids. Fatty acids are basically long chain of carbons, or specifically hydrocarbons with carboxyl group. Carboxyl group is basically a carbon attached, double bonded to an oxygen atom. And it usually looks something like this. So you have your glycerol here, where you have your three carbons with five hydrogens and three hydroxyl group, and usually combine to fatty acids. So this is an example of a fatty acids where you have a chain of carbon. So you have the CCs right here with a carboxyl group. So the carboxyl group is usually here. So in order to create fat molecules, this glycerol and usually three or two fatty acids combine together in a process called dehydration synthesis. Dehydration synthesis because dehydration, we are removing three atoms of H2O, and the OH groups comes from the glycerol and one H from the fatty acids. And synthesis because we are creating triglycerin molecule. So triglyceride is a type of fat molecules, which is a combination of glycerol and fatty acids. This can be similar fatty acids or they can be dissimilar fatty acids, no? But as long as you have one glycerol and three fatty acids attached to that glycerol, it's a type of triglycerol or triglyceride. So as you can see, we remove three atoms of H2O. So you have H2O there, H2O, H2O there. So we are dehydrating it, removing three atoms of water and combining them together, creating this triglyceride. So this, these fat molecules are also commonly called as triglyceride. And examples of these are palmitic acid and acetic acid. So palmitic acid is acid that comes from palm, and arachidic acid is type of acid that comes from peanuts. Arachis hypogaea is the scientific name for some of the peanuts. And we can get different acids or basically different oils, no, from palm and from peanuts because of their triglyceride. Fatty acids may be saturated or unsaturated. When we talk about saturated fat molecules, there are only single bonds between the carbon atoms. So, for example, all of these are single bonds. So, you have carbon attached to carbon in a single bond. So, this is an example of a saturated fatty acids. And then you can have also what we call a unsaturated, wherein there is the double bond that exists between the carbons. So, let's look at that more. Specifically, this is the structure for unsaturated and saturated fatty acids. So we're talking about saturated having a single bonds of carbon. The reason that we call it saturated, it's basically we're saturating the carbons with hydrogen groups. What does that mean is that the number of hydrogens attached to carbon is maximized. So all the, if you guys remember, carbons, all the valence electron, the electrons on their outer shell are all attached to, we're maximizing it, attaching it to carbons and hydrogens. No? And as for unsaturated, as you can see, there are double bonds. So the number of atoms, hydrogen atoms attached to our carbon chain is not maximized because we have double bonds connecting the two carbons together. And the good thing about these is they are actually liquid in room temperature and they usually come from plants. So when we have, yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with like canola oil, vegetable oil, olive oil. All of those are unsaturated fats, no? Because they come from plants, but also because they are liquid, they are oils that are liquid in room temperature, as opposed to saturated fats that usually comes from animals, such as butter. Butter comes from milk, which comes from cows, and these are fats that are saturated. The fats that are in here are saturated, helping them creating a making them packed tightly, making them solid even in room temperature. So if you have oils that are liquid at room temperature, most of the time those are unsaturated fatty acids. They're double bonds between the carbon, and these double bonds are preventing them from packing tightly together, making them liquid in room temperature, as opposed to fatty acids or saturated fatty acids, wherein they can be what we call they can be um, solid at room temperature. That is because the saturation of hydrogen in their carbon chain makes them be able to jam packed tightly together even at room temperature. The issue with saturated fatty acids, however, is there is an increased risk of heart diseases. So, taking too much saturated fatty acids, so if you are eating chips or if you are eating anything, make sure that you look at the ang tawag doon, nutritional facts, no? The nutritional tables on the food that you're eating. Make sure that there's less saturated fat content in your food. There's also an issue, however, with unsaturated fats because restaurants and other food industry sometimes have to hydrogenate the unsaturated fatty acids, meaning they want to make them solid at room temperature, even though their natural property is liquid at room temperature. The reason for that is to keep them from spoiling. So it increases the shelf life to para mas matagal siyang gamitin. Pero because of the hydrogenation process, some of the cis fat is basically a conformation of unsaturated fatty acids wherein the H groups are on the same side. So for example, you have here, so you have a chain of carbons and the hydrogen are on the same side, creating this kink. No? So medyo bended siya. So this bending is what's keeping the unsaturated fat from turning into solid at room temperature. But in order for the this liquid to become solid at room temperature, they have to hydrogenate it, no? So they are pumping hydrogen bubbles into the fat in order for it to become more solid. What happens during that situation is you're creating a trans fat molecule wherein the hydrogen atoms become moved onto the other side. So cis and trans are basically conformation of an atom. When we talk about trans, we are actually talking about a different side, no? So trans meaning the hydrogen groups are on different sides. Cis means on the same side, so the hydrogen groups are on the same side. The issue, however, with this is that it increases the risk of heart diseases as well. So in some food that are peanut butter and margarine is ano ba yung difference no margarine sa butter, no? Margarine, or some of you might have called it margarine. So margarine is basically oil, is a oil that comes from plants. So this is plant-based, as butter is an animal base, more specifically cows and their milk. No, margarine is like butter, is a substitute for butter, but it comes from plants. But the reason that it is solid is because it is hydrogenated. So it is processed to create the trans fat molecule. And since it becomes trans fat, uh, it is possible for it to become solid at room temperature. So, however, the issue with that, like I've mentioned, is increased consumption of trans fat results in increased heart diseases. So, same way that you want to make sure that you are eating less saturated fat, make sure as well that you're eating less trans fat food. No, I'm not saying all peanut butter and margarines are, but a lot of them are. Some of them are. Trans fat, basically eating it is not bad. It's just increased intake. Too much of it is very bad, but a small amount is not bad. Because ultimately, in the end, these are unsaturated fat. There's a double bond, and it's not as bad as saturated fat. You know, so you just have to make sure, be careful on what you eat, especially trans fat. It doesn't mean you should avoid trans fat. Peanut butter and margarine are, taste really good, no? They're really good on toast and bread. But of course, you want to limit on how much trans fat you want to take. Even though there is a bad name for lipids and fats, they have a lot of uses. No, especially lipids we've discussed. That's how we create phospholipids, which is necessary in order for us to create cells. Because without the plasma membrane covering the cell, we cannot separate the ECF and the ICF. Basically, the cell will explode and we're not gonna exist. No. The difference between a fat triglyceride and a phospholipid is a little, just one single difference. You have the glycerol here, no? You remember glycerin or glycerol is basically a molecule with 3 carbons. So you have your glycerol here with 5H, so that's 2, 1, and 2. So you have 5 hydrogen and 3 OH or hydroxyl group. So that's already the O here, no? But the difference is for phospholipids, instead of having 3 fatty acids, you only have 2 fatty acids. So this is a fatty acid. So this is a carbon chain right here with a carboxyl group. So you have your carboxyl group here, and this is a cis fatty acid configuration. Remember, cis on the same side. So here is actually the hydrogen groups. No, um, in college you will know what these structure look like, but this is cis configuration because you have your H there and you have your H there, creating the kink. No, it's na nabanggit ko kanina. So, but again, in phospholipid, you only have two fatty acids, and on the third carbon, what is attached is the phosphate group, making it a phospholipid. So remember, our lipids are actually hydrophobic. So by creating this, we are creating hydrophobic tails, so a region that is hydrophobic. And by attaching the phosphate group, we are creating a area wherein it is a hydrophilic because of that negative OH there. Negative, making it polar. So this is non-polar, this is polar. And this polar molecule here makes it that it likes to bond with water, which is another polar molecule. So polar and polar, they're miscible. I hope you guys remember that. Solutions that tend to be at the same configuration, meaning polar molecules dissolves polar molecules, blah blah blah, non-polar mixed with non-polar. I hope you guys remember that. So making this the head, because of the phosphate group polar, we are creating hydrophilic head wherein it likes to exist in the water. So ganun lang yung major difference niya sa triglyceride. Moreover, lipids can be used in creating what we call hormones. That is because steroids are actually also fats. No, they're also lipids. The only difference is that they are in a ring structure. They do not resemble other lipids that are has a triglycerol that has a glycerol and fatty acids, but their configuration is usually in ring structure. More specifically, cholesterol. Cholesterol, we are very familiar. It has a bad name as well. Too much intake of cholesterol, true, increases also heart risk. But cholesterol, especially those are created from our liver, is what is actually being used in order to create hormones in our body and for vitamins E and K. So here's the structure of cholesterol. And when our body has cholesterol or takes in cholesterol or creates cholesterol, most of the time they have to be taken in because a lot of the fatty acids are actually not created in our body. They have to be consumed in our diet. But one of the very essential fatty acids or omega-3 and omega-6, but also cholesterol. This cholesterol here is being used to create cortisol. Cortisol is what we call a stress hormone. So this is the hormone released when you are stressed to help you cope up with stress. So when you actually see a stressed person and check for the hormones, you will see a lot of cortical hormone or cortisol in their blood. No? Another hormones that is being created in cholesterol is what we call an aldosterone, which is necessary in regulating your blood pressure. And that is related with retention of water from your kidneys, blah, blah, blah. We're not going to go in deeply into that. That is already deeper biology that I hope if you guys go to college and especially in the medical field, you will learn about aldosterone and how blood pressure or and how the kidney and urine water retention from urine actually helps blood pressure. No, the reason for that you urinate is not actually only to release toxins or whatever, but it's actually for regulating your blood pressure. But another hormone that is being created from cholesterol is what we call androstenedione, which is converted to testosterone and estradiol. Estradiol is usually what we call estrogen. Testosterone, you commonly know them as the male hormones. Estrogen is the female hormones. But in reality, we both have them. No, it's just there are much more testosterone hormone in men compared to women, but both hormones exist in our body because they come from cholesterol, which our body which our liver creates. No, so again, even though cholesterol has a really bad name, It has a lot of uses in our body, more specifically creating vitamins E and K, but also the hormones that regulates a lot of body function. No? Creation of our specialists, like for example, sa testosterone, creation of deeper voices sa lalaki, creation of your sperm, creation of the secondary physical traits of men. As for women, you have the estrogen that helps you regulate your menstruation, helps you ovulate, etc., etc. So that has a lot of uses. And lastly, there are some lipids that can be used or that are waxes, which is basically an hydrocarbon with hydroxyl group. Hydroxyl group, remember, that's OH, basically an alcohol group, and fatty acids, and they are very used for protective coating to control evaporation and hydration. So basically, lipids can be used to prevent things from drying out. Example of these various useful uses is the beeswax. Beeswax is what creates the honeycombs. Uh, um, creates the honeycombs, which stores the honey. But these honeycombs or the beeswax can actually be used as protective coating, can be used as plastic, which is one of the oldest way that humans have ever used, plastic. Uh, uh, so yeah, in the civilization. But yeah, so those are the uses of lipids. So just for a summary, it can be used. Um, Phospholipids to create the cholesterol for our hormones, and it can be used for waxes, but also we can create them to make triglycerides, which are the major components of the food that we intake, no? Especially unsaturated and saturated foods. And most especially they have different functions for energy storage, for coating purposes, so for insulation. So this is a type of insulation that also exists in some plants and mammals. It's also used for plasma membrane, things like that. So I hope it's clear what lipids do and why are they necessary for our bodily function. If you guys have any questions, do not hesitate to message me. Thank you so much and have a great day.